Okay, welcome back, everyone. I hope everyone had a nice lunch break. For those of you tuning in on YouTube, also welcome back. We'll start our first afternoon session for the second day of GEEF with a video recorded discussion. And this discussion kind of continues on with the discussions we had in the morning about the use of AI. But this time we're going to talk about different emerging technologies for better engagement and empowerment for enabling the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And this discussion will be led by Stephen Nam, the Special Projects Director at the Stanford University Cyber Policy Center.
All right. Welcome everyone to our session on the governance of emerging technologies. I'm Steve Nam. I'm going to give you a brief overview of our sections for the day. So I'll begin with an introduction to concept. Then we will go into panelist self-introductions, descriptions of recent work related to emerging technologies, and then we'll go into the question and answer session. And first of all, I guess we can begin with our introductions. I'm Steve Nam. I am the Special Projects Director for the Program on Governance of Emerging Technologies at Stanford University, specifically the Stanford Cyber Policy Center. I have worked primarily on Web3 technologies, blockchain, cryptocurrencies, and so forth. But also our center focuses on AI, VR, AR, and social media, as well as a number of other emerging tech. I would like to also introduce Professor Han-Young Won and then Professor Kian Lee, and they can all go into their own self-introductions and descriptions of their recent work related to emerging tech. So without further ado, please go ahead. Why don't we start with Professor Han-Young Won.
네, 여러분 반갑습니다. 저는
Yes, I am Kwon Hun-young, president of the School of Cybersecurity at Korea University. My background is in law, and I've been conducting research and participating in policy development related to information and communication, law and regulation, as well as emerging technology regulation in collaboration with the Korean government for a long time. Today, I'm honored to have the opportunity to share and discuss what we have learned with Professor Stephen Nam and Professor Lee Ki-yeon today. And I believe that in the case of new emerging technologies, there is a significant need for humanity to collectively address relevant issues. I believe that the experiences and regulation that I have accumulated so far and the efforts to prepare for the future are areas that are important for everyone and that everyone, all nations, all business, all scholars, and all researchers need to undertake together. So I hope that today's session will provide us with ample opportunities to exchange such thoughts, and I look forward to the time when we can all meet and discuss together in person. Nice to meet you all.
Thank you very much. And Young 교수님, please feel free to go ahead. Introduction. After that, I will go into the introduction of concept.
네, 안녕하세요.
Good afternoon. As have been introduced, I am igee.yonsei from Yonsei University. I'm a professor of Creative Technology Management within the Humanities, Arts, and Social Sciences Division at Yonsei University's Underwood International College. I studied computer science, economics, and industrial engineering, and I've also worked in the Department of Library and Information Science and the Department of Technology Management. My main area of research is measuring and quantifying social phenomena using data. I have been analyzing new technologies, researchers, and even philosophy, ethics, media, and society. And recently, I've been analyzing policies and legislation. So I think a lot of what we're going to be talking about today is how we would like to see these regulations or policies change, or how we would like to see ourselves react in order to better utilize these new technologies in our society. Thank you both so much for having me today.
Thank you very much, Professor Lee. As for the introduction to concept, I'll begin right now. So in today's context, the emergence of new technologies, notably AI and other cutting-edge technologies, has introduced challenges that fundamentally challenge existing societal structures. The rapid advancement of these technologies has brought about complexities that transcend individual, institutional, and democratic frameworks. Recognizing the urgency of this issue, GEEF 2024 is bringing together scholars from prestigious academic institutions like Yonsei University, Korea University, and Stanford University to collaborate strategically, and this partnership seeks to uphold democratic governance and societal welfare, collectively addressing the crucial task of ensuring that these emerging technologies are compatible with society. The challenges posed by emerging technologies are multifaceted, requiring a concerted effort from diverse stakeholders within society. GEF 2024 acknowledges that sustainable development necessitates the resolution of these problems collectively, together. So GEF 2024 seeks to facilitate meaningful dialogue and implement solutions that harmonize emerging technologies with the values and needs of our society. So thank you again for joining us. Without further ado, I think we can go into our questions. Right. So question number 1. What is your greatest concern with respect to the exponential, the rapid speed of development that we're seeing in AI and other technologies? And are there reasons for optimism? I can probably, I'll answer first for each of these questions, and then we can move on, proceed with the other academics on this panel. So my greatest concern with respect to the exponential speed of development of technologies is that increasingly, I think we are seeing a lagging, slow governmental regulatory response to these technologies because of their increasing complexity. So perhaps not in the too distant past, a lot of the times governments were able to keep up to speed and to adjust and to kind of adapt to development of new technologies. They were able to verse themselves, to research, to learn, to communicate with other stakeholders, to be able to then understand and then respond with flexible, educated regulation. But increasingly, because of the enormous, again, complexities and nuances to this tech, and this can apply to, for example, artificial intelligence, generative AI. Also, we see this often in the Web3 space with blockchain cryptocurrencies. The level of understanding, of comprehension needed is often beyond what the typical background of a regulator, of a politician, of bureaucrats are used to. So we need very rapid reaction in terms of having academics, having the private sector help educate these regulators and bureaucrats and politicians and so forth. But there's a lag for sure. Increasingly also, we're finding that unlike in the past with the internet, I'd say the second industrial revolution and so forth, where policymakers, they themselves were able to easily use the technology. I remember still when in the United States, America Online emerged on the scene. It was really a mainstream gateway to internet usage, such as email, creating websites and chat rooms and things like that. And regulators themselves, policymakers themselves were able to use America Online easily after they get home from work. And this enabled a level of familiarity that then informed their next steps in terms of actually building a governmental kind of a framework for consumers that made sense. But with things like generative AI and Web3, of course, there might be, if we're lucky, there might be a very, very kind of surface, shallow usage, just kind of dabbling with the tech. But we need a deeper dive by the policymakers themselves, even in their free time. And then I think that would translate into better policy. But again, there is a divide. There's a gap that could use better education and more bridge making for these policymakers. Then I'll get into reasons for optimism, but first let's hear from our other panelists. Professor Kwon, again, if you would like to answer about what's your greatest concern with respect to this rapid development of technologies such as AI and other emerging tech?
이 주제
Well, this topic seems to require our perspective on very fundamental issues. Although technological development has been part of human history for a very long time, it has had a much greater impact on humanity in the past 50 years since the invention of computers. Compared to the progress that has been made in human history, the changes brought about by technology during this time are far more significant. With the invention of computers, the invention of the internet, and now the development of AI, artificial intelligence, it seems that we have reached a point where we can implement and achieve things that we previously only imagined or idealized theoretically. The accumulation of data, the development of communication infrastructure, the social utility, and even human intervention are all almost remarkably close to the levels we have envisioned. The question of whether we will experience what is commonly referred to as the singularity is one that we must address, prepare for, and monitor together in the future. And I believe that policymakers are naturally inclined to create regulations reactively after emerging technologies have already been implemented or applied, and society or policy reacts after these have been implemented. However, I have a desire for us to look at this issue from a broader perspective. What I mean is that the science and technology that brought about the Industrial Revolution, such as the steam engine, completely changed the institutions of human history, creating societies like modern capitalism and nation-states. And these developments are interconnected internationally, forming today's international order. I believe that the fight over technology in the future also raises questions about whether the current system will continue to persist or whether there will be fundamental changes in the relationships among society, nations, and humans. The current regulatory system and governance structure are designed to fit the industrial society, and accordingly, national strategies tailored to this framework are standardized and taught to all countries, grooming the next generation of workers and leaders. All three of our panelists are working in academia, but the biggest commonality among us is that we work in areas other than our originally disciplined areas. We work in converging fields. And that's why I believe we're striving to find answers to these questions that we're asking, considering who we are educating for the current and future digital transformation, DX society or digital society. So we need to examine who we are nurturing to work in these fields. And from that perspective, it seems that relying too much on the traditional industrial society education system, regulatory system, and market structure may not adequately prepare us for the future. Therefore, when it comes to the education sector, I believe that there must be a profound change. And for such a change to be successful, well, we need to discard pessimistic thinking and design an optimistic future. If we look at the situations in the United States and Korea, first the United States. In the US, well, there has been more proactive an approach. The US is a pioneering country in transitioning to the digital economy, starting from the invention of the internet. And the world has responded to the United States' leading policies, particularly in emerging technologies such as AI, biotechnology, space technology, and other related fields. The US is leading the world in these areas, and other countries may respond differently. Some countries may actively adopt and follow the US lead, while others may resist and follow their own path, often centered around regulations, and some countries may even choose to go in a totally different direction. In the case of Korea, efforts have been made to proactively follow and even surpass U.S. policies. South Korea has made significant strides in laying down information and communications infrastructure and promoting the digital economy to the extent that there is almost no gap with the United States in some areas. Then, what was the role of regulation in this process? The U.S. tends to entrust as much freedom as possible to the private sector for creative innovation, with the government intervening only when counterproductive outcomes arise, such as cases of defamation or copyright infringement, or when enhanced protection of children's privacy is required, or excessive concentration of economic power requires intervention to ensure fair competition. The U.S. typically reinforces regulation post facto in these cases. In the case of South Korea, the government has taken a more proactive role in leading investment from the private sector, with laws and regulations ensuring this positive regulation. Subsequently, South Korea has also implemented negative regulation along with the U.S., which continues to this day. And this regulative response has a strong influence on policymakers. And this kind of perspective has enabled NGOs, scholars, business people, and regulatory authorities to move quickly and adopt. So as a result, South Korea's positioning differs somewhat from that of the United States and Europe. From this perspective, with appropriate promotional regulation and negative regulation addressing side effects, if regulations are implemented well with very clear objectives, I believe that constructing the digital economy that we optimistically envision is actually something that we can achieve in Korea.
Thank you very much, 교수님, Professor Won. And let's also hear Professor Lee's answer.
네, 감사합니다.
Yes, thank you. Having listened to the two of you, I could see that there were many overlapping thoughts. I am also excited and concerned at the same time about the rapid development of AI and all these new technologies. Of course, as Professor Kwon mentioned, there is the issue of regulations and policies that are aligned with the paradigm of the industrial society. And there are some of these issues that you mentioned, but I would like to speak from another perspective. One is that technologies are developing so fast that we often have to make decisions without the benefit of having full knowledge. And I wonder if we are actually making more and more sacrifices. In fact, as technology itself becomes more complex and diverse, it requires more sophisticated regulation or promotional policies. But the fact is that technology itself is moving so fast. So in order to understand technology, you actually have to talk to the person who developed the technology. It's hard to know how to regulate the technology because the person who developed the technology, as someone who created the technology, will always think their technology is simply great. And it is difficult for the creator of a given technology to know about how to regulate the given technology. And because there is self-interest, most of these technologies are made by companies that are driven by the pursuit of profit. So it's a bit of a question mark as to how much filtering is possible. As Professor Kwon has mentioned, the academia and NGOs should be able to quickly provide education and training, contributing to policies. I am concerned about whether even the academia and NGOs are driven by self-interest to a certain extent. because I think that policies that are currently being made that allow technologies to develop and then attempt to regulate the side effects are likely not going to have a very big impact on the people who have the wealth or the people who are at the forefront of these technologies. But they may have a potential to have a big impact on the people who have neither. For example, in the use of data, there are privacy boards, but I think the way data is being used currently is that individuals who don't understand the value of their data are being victimized. I think it's much more likely that they don't even realize how their data is being used, and they're giving consent without that understanding. So we're actually the ones who should be the first ones to point out these issues and also speak out about the new ways of doing things. There are aspects that need to be reflected upon, but there is the idea that policies can only be made properly if they are backed up quickly. So it is very likely that systematically we need to have some kind of organization or institution or group of people who can inform policymakers about these new technologies in a well understood form and in a very literal form, because there will always be new technologies and the development of technology will become faster and faster. And if there is a need now, I would say that academic societies and academic communities should play this role. Most of all, I think that because technology is developing so fast, when we're making decisions in such a situation, the more confusing it is, the more we need to focus on the fundamentals, not on the distractions, not on the hustle and bustle, because at the end of the day, technology is here to assist us in our lives. And I think we need to hear what are the side effects of this in assisting us in our lives. I've been looking at AI bills that have been proposed in Korea during the past several months, and when I actually looked at the AI bills, it was hard to say that they were written with a good understanding of AI or new technologies. Actually, most of the bills did slightly seem to have been driven by stakeholders. And one more thing I would like to add about the development of technology is that we also need to pay attention to laws and institutions. But I think there's one part that we are missing the most. Before we have laws and institutions, when we use certain media or when we use certain technologies, we had a bit of leeway because it was slower, so our lifestyles and our culture could adapt to it. And there was a sense of civility. But I think that's been destroyed currently. Therefore, we need to think a little bit more about the civility that we need to have with this new way of life that we're not going to cover with just laws and institutions. We need to make sure that we build civility that we have towards each other and create a sense of social consensus.
Thank you very much to both our professors for their excellent, comprehensive answers. Very, very helpful. I understand through the session we will have many expressions of pessimism and and addressing our the very shortcomings in the space that need to be improved. But are there reasons also for optimism at this point, at this pace? I think one reason that I can think of is that in our, I guess, not too long history of reacting to IT technological responses, we have proven that we don't have to be acting, responding in a silo. By that, I mean there are institutional frameworks that for collaboration that exist that have been used. One of them would be SROs, that refers to self-regulatory organizations. A very good example is FINRA. And FINRA deals with kind of financial innovations and technological advances throughout the world, and that are in need of kind of a coherent international response. Because as we know, a lot of these financial innovations affect a lot of countries and are not just limited to one country. So FINRA has been fairly effective, I would say, in terms of gathering together various stakeholders and issuing guidances, advisories that relate to new tech. Uh, and specifically with respect to kind of the finance sector, of course, with FINRA, but many, many technologies can affect the finance sector. So we're seeing a broad response of in terms of expertise. So I think with emerging tech, and this is always the case, I think we tend to think that emerging tech is a product of our time right now, but every era has its own problems and technologies to address. I think that whether it's AI or XR, AR, VR, Web3, etc., there is space eventually for perhaps an SRO that's effective. Of course, it's not as simple as some might want it to be. There has to be a buy-in, opt-in by various entities, companies, organizations for this to be effective. But we do have examples of proven effectiveness, again, such as FINRA. So that's why I think one reason for optimism that this is a possibility, perhaps, for example, in the AI sector. Another, I think, tool that we have in our toolkit are kind of these informal international networks. My background is in competition law, antitrust law, as a lawyer. And for us, we had something called the ICN, the International Competition Network. This was a broad umbrella of different regulatory kind of, let's say, trade commissions, bureaucratic entities throughout the world. So the US had the FTC, Korea, Japan, in Europe, all the kind of bureaucratic organizations related to competition, antitrust were in this one big umbrella network called the ICN. And we and continue, I say we, but I'm not involved in the space anymore, but there were a lot of activities and summits and conferences that brought together these policymakers and regulatory organizations throughout the world so that they could have they could focus on kind of harmonizing their approaches to competition. Because again, this was competition antitrust laws are it's a patchwork throughout the world, so it's not very coherent at times, but there was a need for more coherence all the time. So that was an approach, a response to that kind of a international, I guess, approach problem. I think that that's also a possibility with emerging tech such as AI, where we band together a lot of governmental kind of, agencies throughout the world to kind of cohere on how to approach various problems. And I think it will be necessary in order to avoid kind of this silo by silo response approach that will be that could be very problematic. So those are my reasons for optimism. Professor Kwan, any suggestions of your own?
Professor Nam, I am delighted to hear that your major was in competition law as a fellow legal scholar. In fact, in South Korea, there are various agencies responsible for competition law, and also there's agencies responsible for IT regulations. There's agencies for data protection, such as the Personal Information Protection Commission. And additionally, there are separate agencies responsible for regulating money markets, such as banking services. There's the Financial Services Commission, the FSC. So there are various agencies working within a silo system. As digital innovation progresses, there are overlapping jurisdictions, and controversy surrounding such overlapping jurisdictions exists, which I'm sure is common in many countries. However, I believe that within their own jurisdictions, coordination and cooperation among the relevant authorities are taking place. It seems crucial that Professor Nam, as he explained, that the umbrella organization centered around the WTO existed in an international context. Currently, competition authorities globally have already begun regulatory competition over big tech companies within their jurisdictions. And I'm sure that Professor Nam has seen many of such cases. And I believe competition law is a relatively recent field in some sense, especially considering its international development since it first appeared around the 1950s. So it's a field that has less than a history of 100 years compared to other legal fields spanning thousands of years. When you consider the IT sector, you can see the efforts towards cooperation among international competition law agencies are actually being attempted in the field of data protection. Each country has data authorities. And what triggered this is regulations like the GDPR in Europe, the General Data Protection Regulation. And there was efforts to determine the adequacy of GDPR, and this has influenced Korea as well. In fact, when I worked on drafting the initial version of Korea's Personal Information Protection Act 20 years ago, I proposed establishing such an organization. However, it was not implemented at all initially, even after the law was passed. But I think that GDPR influenced Korea as well, leading to the establishment of the Personal Information Protection Commission in some sense. So this ongoing transformation seems to be the next strategic step with the EU's efforts to create a new umbrella for AI regulation. And so we are seeing these attempts are ongoing progressively. However, when you think about it, for regulations to actually function in the market, well, intervention by the state is necessary, which means that there has to be an international agreement among nations that national sovereignty-based authority is necessary. However, the United States does not want such an agreement. Korea is showing a very ambiguous position. And Professor Lee probably has reviewed the artificial intelligence related laws. But there are unique circumstances in Korea where the law in Korea seems to lean towards reflecting ways to promote the AI industry and ways to benefit those who are engaged in the AI business rather than regulate. In Europe, there are currently no AI companies. It is a market structure where AI technology should be applied by big tech companies rather than being a fundamental technology owned by European companies. And considering the competitive situation among countries in the international arena, such as China, Middle Eastern countries, and various Asian countries, when we think about what will happen if a global umbrella is created, it is likely to lead to a competition among the US and other countries, in other words. The advanced nations versus the non-advanced states. That's how I see it. So what is the best way to get out of such a situation? Since we don't know well, it's obvious that we would want to start with regulation, because without regulation, there would be no benefit, as we're talking about competition among nations. So when we think about regulation, we have to think back about the essence of regulation, self-regulation. And so when we think about the essence of regulation, all technology regulations that have persisted for a long time can be seen as regulations based on successful self-regulation. For example, Professor Nam, you studied telecommunications law, and if you think about the origin of telecommunications law, you will find that in the United States, there was radio wave interference resulting in a complete loss of industrial competitiveness. And in such turmoil, the current FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, was established. I'm right. It's the FTC, right? The Federal Trade Commission, which can be seen as a combination of self-regulation and government regulation achieved through consultation among regulatory authorities. When we look at agencies like the FTC, it may seem like there's heavy regulation from the central authority. However, in reality, FTC operating team is given significant authority, and in some ways, it even has legislative power. This represents a very unique model. Similarly, in the case of the nuclear industry, the industry has to seek approval to survive, so the industry itself requested for regulations from regulatory authorities. In the field of AI, as well as telecommunications and other emerging fields in the future, stakeholders, those who invest capital, conduct research, and employ numerous individuals, we call them key players. Well, currently in the field of AI, individuals cannot beat corporations just by innovating on their own, given the immense resources and efforts required. We are at a stage where nations and corporations will have to continue to make great strides to keep up with the pace of advancement worldwide. Therefore, the concept of self-regulation must succeed in order for this technology to continue to thrive in the long term and eventually become standardized. Therefore, when discussing about the issue of singularity in artificial intelligence, suggesting that humanity should regulate it comprehensively like nuclear or biotechnology, the response from technology developers and capitalists is often about creating explainable AI. They emphasize that they are not aiming to develop completely uncontrollable artificial AI, and so they're proposing to regulate. And that's why proposals for regulation tend to come forward first. Therefore, during such interactions between society and the state, there exist the balance makers. And so the balance makers, these are the players, the stakeholders. And here it is essential to have NGOs and academia who can serve as watchdogs and forecasters who consider the interests and benefits of humanity as a whole rather than just their own interests or affiliations, to play a crucial role in ensuring that the gap between regulation and successful industrial development is not disrupted.
Thank you very much, Professor Kwon. First of all, I agree personally with every single point you made, and I honestly, I see it as a kind of the need for long-term thinking in a way, strategic long-term thinking, non-self-interested, referring to Professor Lee, your answer as well. And this can really come from academics and NGOs, because a lot of the private sector, of course, short-term thinking, short-term, quick, tactical, approaches to the market, how to compete, how to succeed. But as academics and also NGOs, we need that long-term thinking for a healthy overall market economy society, really. So thank you very much for that, Professor Johnson. And Professor Lee, any reasons for optimism of your own with regards to this rapid advancement of technology?
네, 저는
I'm not actually on competition law or privacy boards or work at the Financial Services Institute. So I am speaking as someone who is not an academic in legal studies, but on the technology side, we're moving at super speed. So actually, I think that if we focus a bit more on solving societal issues or issues that can be caused by rapid technological development, we can solve these issues better, more efficiently, and more effectively than what we do now. So in other words, in the case of technological issues, for example, after deep learning came out, there were a lot of hardware issues, but now we have breakthroughs and we are overcoming many of the issues in hardware. So it seems that there are limits, but we are overcoming these limits one by one. For example, as chips and new technologies come out, the software itself improves with the development of algorithms. So reality is that what we thought to be difficult in the early 2020s are now already being solved. And if we go back about 20 years, many people say that AI would never be able to win in the game of Go, but that has already happened, and it is now widely accepted. This was because of computational complexity, which have already been solved. Things like Apple Vision Pro are possible because of AI chips. Some of these things that we said were difficult to solve before are being solved sooner than we would have thought. So, with this problem-solving ability, the solutions to societal issues that I mentioned before will be within reach, I believe. And I believe that the possibility of solutions would be faster than what we imagine now. For example, climate change AI or the AI sector at the OECD. And within the UN, they use AI to monitor SDGs or the emergence of many communities, such as AI for social good, AI for good, and data science for good, allows us to have a more positive view rather than the negative and pessimistic view that I mentioned earlier. And I believe that it's possible because there are still many people out there who are saying, I want to use these new technologies for good. But I don't think this is something that we can leave up to the people, to the individuals forever. We need to approach this collectively. That is why we have to think about the culture. We do need to rethink in terms of culture, as I have mentioned already.
Thank you very much for your thoughts, Professor Lee. I completely agree. I think we have a lack of cultural communication in recent years in terms of responding to technology, and because of that, if we focus only on the technology and even only on the laws, we're missing a very critical component, kind of the societal aspect of how to adapt to new technologies that if we don't address will cause problems. It can be anything from psychological issues to kind of have a tension between different countries without a real kind of cultural understanding of a host of issues that it's too long to get into right now, but we'll proceed for now. But thank you very much for those insights. Now we're going to get a little more into the details. So I understand we gave some kind of broad responses, and of course we had the detail already, but now we're going to kind of get into granular. So we do have a number of questions, so let's try to move a little quicker, I would say, from this point on. Question number 2. Policymakers are faced with increasingly complex technologies that defy easy understanding. The private sector companies that can best educate them are typically self-interested. This is something that Professor Lee has hinted at already previously. So what is the role and duty of academic experts in such circumstances? And this I can answer first. I think it's very tricky. As we know, academics ourselves, we also have our interests, right? I think there's a need to be, first of all, of course, to keep updated on the cutting edge, to be really relevant and to be informative for whether our students or fellow academics, we need to know what is at the very cutting edge, what's the newest developments for relevance sake. But and in order to do that, we want to maintain good relations with the various actors in our space, of course. But at the same time, we also need to be, to the extent possible, neutral arbiters, observers. We cannot, as excited as we might be on the personal level, we have to also be very studied in our approaches, in our kind of in our research, in our papers, in our expression of what our opinions are. And this cannot always be positive. It cannot always be favorable for the other actors, stakeholders that we have to engage with. One example that I can talk about that's specific is I recently attended kind of a working group seminar with different stakeholders, and this applies to the Web3 space. It could easily apply to AI and other technologies as well. But long story short, there is a very strong lobbying component from private sector companies. Without going into details, about specifics, identity, etc. Some of these lobbying efforts are very kind of, they're very smart, they're very focused. You could say they're clever, and I think in terms of courting, engaging with governments, they have to be. But at the same time, I can give you example in Web3. in the U.S., which is very, very careful in terms of its approach, and I think it's a good approach in terms of not being too reckless in terms of allowing various innovations. Same time, the U.S. approach has been, or the lobbying approach to the government has been, this is a matter of national security. If the U.S. does not dominate the Web3 space, another country will. It could be China, it could be autocratic countries, so forth. And this has been the approach, the main lobbying approach by a lot of U.S. Web3 entities. And sure, there is a national security component to kind of being on top of the space, just like there is with AI, with XR. It is increasingly more than ever, a lot of these emerging technologies have national security implications and consequences. I agree to that, but it can be very, what can I say? It can trample upon a lot of these kind of cultural, societal elements that we have to think of. In the Web3 space, the technology itself was born of freedom of expression, of the kind of desire for independence of kind of overarching government oversight and control, and things like monetary sovereignty is also a very big, very significant philosophical component to Web3. And this kind of talk of national domination over technology, it's of course it can make the government wake up and be very concerned and so forth. But I think it's again, it can be very short-term thinking, because later on it might be too late to kind of adjust and react and say, by the way, there are all these philosophical and societal components that we also need to consider, for it to be a big tent for all stakeholders to participate. If it simply becomes a matter of national security that we have to dominate space, this is very restrictive, and it can be very antagonistic to a lot of important stakeholders who do not agree in terms of seeing this as simply a national security concern. So I think academics, we have to step into that gap. We have to say, by the way, that's just one voice, that's just one concern, and we have a host of other themes and concerns to consider if we want the participation of everyone who is important, who deserves a voice in the space. And government is, of course, an important actor, but it's only one actor, and we cannot we can't fall into the trap of catering to of short-term thinking. Again, referring to Professor Kwon's thoughts, cannot fall into the short-term thinking trap, and just cater to one actor. So academics, I think, have to fill that gap, and again, be neutral to the extent possible, and say, early on, and kind of create a welcoming space for different stakeholders. So that's my response. Professor Kwon, your thoughts on the specific academic role that we have to play. Thank you.
Listening to what Professor Nam has just said, I feel a great sense of responsibility. I think it was back in 2000 or 2001, there was an event in Stockholm. It was an icon on internet governance. It was the early years. And there was a plenary session held, and the speaker asked a question to the participants, who were mainly internet engineers and experts, around 500 of them. And the speaker asked, do you think technology will prevail over government, or do you think government will prevail over technology? When asked this question, more than about half of the engineers answered that technology will prevail. And at that time, the Napster incident was a hot topic of the day, and discussions revolved around whether DRM technology could protect content, or if cracking technology would outpace it. And I was thinking to myself whether this would really be the case. And if you look back at the history of internet, Professor Nam, you will recall how figures like John Perry Barlow boldly declared that nation-state power will have no influence. It was like a declaration of independence. However, looking back after 20 or 30 years, it's evident that nation-state power now dominates technology much more significantly today. than in the past. It seems like we've reached a point where independent researchers cannot surpass the control exerted by nation states over internet technology, patents, and other aspects of technology. So the question now arises, what should be done next? Those in academia or those who understand the essence of the issue continuously has to discuss what needs to be done. And the consensus is that transparency is crucial. It's essential to provide transparency and avoid secrecy or secrecy-driven approaches. And then communication. Communication with the public is important. Some people tend to refer to this as literacy. However, framing it as literacy implies a need to enhance people's capabilities, which leads the conversation in a slightly different direction. Therefore, I believe that academia must focus on how to ensure transparency and how to communicate it to as many people as possible, as this is crucial for addressing this issue. And that's our role moving forward. But it's not a new role. In fact, it's been the focus of the democratic systems that humanity has historically created. So I want to emphasize the importance of paying attention to this aspect. As Professor Nam mentioned, even in situations where national security seems to overshadow everything, we've been experiencing similar challenges over centuries. The strengthening of state power, especially with the rise of conservatism, has always emphasized crisis and the need to protect our society from external threats. In this process, what has suffered? Freedom of expression. And when we discuss these issues, I believe the essence lies, as I mentioned earlier, in transparency and communication. The term emerging technology implies scientific knowledge known only to certain groups. So it's a technology or scientific knowledge held only by a certain number of people. So the problem is how to position those who seek to reap the benefits of such technology before it is fully disseminated and lobby accordingly. In fact, these are the surviving technologies in terms of regulation. However, such an approach has not allowed technologies to survive for long. Technologies that endure in the long term are mostly those that implement self-regulation, actively communicate such innovations, and ensure rapid dissemination rather than leaving it to the long tail so that they can be more widely communicated. Thus, if one understands this fact well, what should academia do? What is a role that academia should play? As I mentioned earlier, academia should manage this from a neutral standpoint to avoid failure. If individuals in academia lean too much towards the vigilant perspective, become excessively pessimistic, or at the same time overly optimistic, most of them will end up being disqualified. No one will want to listen to them. They will no longer be in demand. Instead, those close with business or closer to those in power will be in demand. So people keep the wheel turning for their own benefit. Considering such a situation, the academia's role is always to strive for securing transparency a bit faster and above all to ensure that communication is not delayed. These two tasks are the roles of academia. However, this work is currently underway in Korea. How to regulate platforms in Korea is currently under discussion, and the same discussion about big tech is taking place in the United States right now. The debate revolves around whether to break up big tech companies, as the U.S. did with AT&T in the past, or to restrict their market, or to spread the influence of technology to other areas. And similarly, in Korea, there is now a debate about platform companies. Currently, Korea has domestic companies competing with global big tech companies in the Korean market, which is one of the few cases worldwide. However, these companies are not only providing innovative services to consumers, but also causing some harm at the same time. Therefore, there is a need to resolve this issue. But right now there is controversy over whether there should be self-regulation or government regulation. And so one is about the market regulation and another is metaverse. And in metaverse, we believe that there will be technological regulation, which will be strengthened. But therefore, these issues are present, and academia has a significant role to play in addressing them. If academia successfully fulfills its role in transparency and communication, regulation can proceed reasonably. However, if autonomous regulation alongside academia fails, stronger state power may establish regulatory authority. And this is my perspective. I believe that within the next 5 years, the Korean government may see initial results in addressing these issues.
Thank you very much, Professor Kwon. Lots of food for thought. I will not forget transparency communication. I think that's very easy to remember, but extremely important and something academic sector is very it's necessary for us to uphold because the private sector and the government are not usually known for transparency and communication. So it's really our role. Thank you very much, Professor Lee. Your thoughts.
네, 전반적으로
Overall, I tend to agree with everything that Professor Kwon has mentioned. I do believe that Professor Kwon spoke more from a government position, and I would like to take this opportunity to take on a more general approach. I think we need to have an environment where we can play as a team, where we can trust each other so that the market can function properly. And that means that scholars have to play their role, and scholars will have their own self-interest. And other people may not agree with me, but I believe that scholars actually have a role to play in leading research, to have the first look, and to share whether something is dangerous or beneficial. So if you think about it, when we do research, we say that we are advancing knowledge, but we're actually creating new knowledge for the advancement of humanity. The reason why we do research and teach is because we are contributing to the dignified lives for all. We need to be true to these fundamentals. I think scholars should remember neutral positions, for example, when emerging technologies are born. If you are driving certain emerging technologies, or even if you are not driving the technology but observing from the sidelines, you also need to maintain neutral positions. I think we have to think about this neutral position. On the other hand, Professor Kwon, you mentioned that AI and other technologies are now difficult to work on unless you do it at some scale, perhaps at the enterprise level or beyond. On one hand, that's quite true, but on the other hand, I think we should also remember that companies are in a race against each other. For example, if it's a 100-meter dash, everyone is in the race, so they don't have time to look at what others need around them. So, for example, if everyone is building a large language model, and if everyone is working to make it bigger and stronger, when we say stronger, we have very few indicators to measure the performance. So there are actually parts that should be seen from multidimensional perspectives. Scholars should contribute from this aspect, and that is why we have organizations such as ACM FACT. In a way, I would say that there are many areas to which individuals can contribute, and those are the areas that may be missed by companies or governments that are running in the race. We need to find these areas quickly and talk about them, because if you're running in a race, you may be running without even realizing which direction you are running. So I think we need more research in these areas. And as Professor Kwon has mentioned, communication is actually very important in our society, which Professor Kwon mentioned with transparency. I think we can say that we do not really know how to communicate. We don't have channels for communications. We don't have protocols to follow. and there are no levels of consciousness that individuals need to follow. So there are no set levels. And these are areas that need to be thought out. When I was studying computers and networks, I used to think that network protocols were more human-like than protocols for human communication. Because before beginning, an input to inform the start of communication, followed by hello, was the protocol. But when people communicate with one another, we actually are not always that friendly. On the other hand, I think that people who are driving emerging technologies should give more consideration to CSR, ESG, or sustainability. When they are presenting these technologies to policymakers, it would be great if there was some kind of checklist for the policymakers that are provided with the technologies. When governments are making these policies, they bring in experts, or they train someone from within, or even hire consultants. But when they do so, they need to be very clear about who they bring in, who they train, and who they consult. It should be clear what kind of advice they are receiving. Well, currently I am working on giving verbal instructions to computers, and when we talk to computers or even to people, the instructions are not as detailed as we might think. When that happens, computers cannot perform the task, nor can humans. When we're hiring or training or looking for advice, we should be very specific, and the government should also make efforts on this front.
Thank you, Professor Lee. Very insightful response. I'm thinking of the fact that academics can be on the front lines, at the edge, ourselves, doing the research that's not being done, providing the input that needs to be there at the very beginning instead of simply reacting. I think that's a great point. And of course, your other points made as well, just very insightful. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor Lee, and to both our panelists. Really appreciate the amazing insights and thought-provoking input because, frankly, there's a lot to think about, and it's not something any one person or organization can handle. So hopefully, the audience also comes away with this with a lot of new insights. And we want to thank everyone again for attending this session. And we'll keep in touch. Bye-bye.
Okay. Thank you very much. So I think this had some very inspiring words on how people working in the technology sector or the people who are targeting to use technology in their own domains can approach technology in terms of how new emerging technology in terms of UN SDGs. So with this, we'll conclude this session and we'll take a 20-minute break and return at 14:20 Seoul time, Korea time, to proceed with our next session on the roles of Korean startups and blended finance in achieving SDGs. Thank you.